which God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Must have started a little late, right? Okay. All right, so the recording started a little late, so we'll go, who's taking attendance? Anybody? No, I know, but still, we'd like to. One of the, I'm gonna pass a policy. I like the attendance part, because then years later, you could see who was whom. Okay, I don't know if anybody heard me, because I heard the recording went on a little bit, a few minutes later. It's Flag Day today, so happy Flag Day, and thank you to Jack Riley for reminding us about the importance of Flag Day. And some flags are, the American flag is the one we fly all year round and that we do Pledge of Allegiance. So it's nice to have a day where we take a minute and honor the flag. Do we have any announcements?
Are you going to talk about Juneteenth is on the
can do it.
waterfront? There's a waterfront celebration for Juneteenth on Sunday, the 18th, with lots of vendors and events and music. And it should be fun. It's important observance of an important day.
Okay, and so that, and we've publicized it a lot. It's a relatively new holiday. A lot of the banks are closed in New York. I don't know what the national scope is. In fact, I wrote an email earlier. But certainly in New York, it's a holiday where banks are closed, businesses, etc. Also, it is the Portuguese Fair is what time? 10 to 10 or 10 to 11? Okay, so we'll have to have that topic too about events and revisiting the events. Somebody should remind me at the end of today. But the Portuguese Fair is on Saturday. I looked at the weather. I think it's going to be pretty good. So there is lots of social activities, lots of really amazing food, lots of honoring Portugal and Portuguese community, which I think, and you're going to correct me, but I believe it's 135 years historically. It has been in Ossining for about 135 years. The last I looked, huh? The Portuguese community.
They go way
So
back.
about 100
early, late 19th or 20th century.
Right. So big part of our community, even for those that moved away, they do come back. We have a number of restaurants, food places. So always fun, always looking forward to it. You already mentioned the Juneteenth. I mentioned it's a 3-day holiday. Municipal offices are closed, so people should know that. And we are going to get started with the meeting unless you have, do you have anything? Okay, and Omar Lopez is going to join us later tonight, this evening. And Bob DeRayo is on vacation this week.
Bob Fritchie.
Bob Fritchie. Did I say DeRayo? Well, I'll tell you why I'm thinking about him. Bob DeRayo is a member of our community, and it's been on social media. His wife, Gail, is during the Tonys a couple of days ago, his wife and her team who do major Broadway shows won Tonys, more than one Tony. And that's sort of a big deal. And so
Costuming, right?
for costumes, yeah, she's a costumer for 25 to 30 years, and she's had apprentices from Ossining, work with her. She's done some of the biggest shows on Broadway. And I was actually texting them before I got in here. That's why it's on my mind. It's all connected. So congratulations to Gail as well in our community. So we are going to get started. Village Manager.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Let me turn on my microphone here. So a couple of weeks ago, we went on a bus tour, and it was an opportunity for the Board of Trustees to be able to see firsthand some of the areas that we have some challenges with traffic flow and parking. And we also looked at some properties that we're dealing with the code enforcement. And we have now been, we were able to see things firsthand. And now we have the opportunity to discuss those things that we saw. I'm going to take you through a very brief sort of discussion guide, if you will. Jamie, if you could bring that up, please. So I believe it was May 24th, not the 26th that we went on the trip, but that's a minor detail. So we go to the next slide. Okay, great. So one of the things that, no matter where we went, we really, bless you, we went, bless you, everybody. We started the tour on Van Cortlandt, we drove around Howell Street, then
Sorry,
we
can
went
I-
up.
Sorry, just got text in that there's no audio on the,
There's no audio? Okay, can you hear now?
no, someone from the, no, from watching.
Oh,
I
it's,
guess.
it's
it's
on to
in the,
Jesse.
it's the Zoom audience then, or,
No,
Could be the TV.
Is it cable or is it?
are they on Zoom or
on?
watching on cable?
I have audio coming from my.
yeah, everything seems fine. Ask the person what they're on. Okay. We need to keep moving because
Sorry
we're,
about that. Yeah, go
most of the venues are working. We can't, yeah, well.
Okay,
see who
so
that
are
is.
we? Okay, okay.
They'll get back
um,
to us.
So again, we started the trip, we started on Van Cortlandt Street, we drove around to Havel Street, we rode up Denny and Yale, and then we drove down Croton Avenue back to Village Hall. Wherever we went, one of the issues is on-street parking. And as we know, there's an insufficient amount of on-street parking available for those who need it and are currently permitted to use it overnight. And we want to have a goal of ensuring that off-street parking is available to those with no off-street, on-street, that should be on-street options. So some of the recommendations, these are things that these are not new problems. They're problems that we've been talking about for a long time, long before I've been here. We're hoping we don't talk about it too much longer, but we really are trying to work on things to mitigate the issues. So one of the things that we've been talking about, and we have a bit more capacity to do now, is to tighten the eligibility requirements before we look at expanding supply, because we don't want to perpetuate a problem, an ongoing problem, because we're not, we haven't really right-sized the process and our capacity to not only assign the places, but to enforce as well. So we're working on an inventory of on-street parking spaces within our current on-street parking program. We're also working to incorporate property-specific and applicant-specific to receive, for people to receive a hardship or overnight parking permit. And that really talks to the way when people apply, it's based on the fact that they don't have a off-street parking option at their home. But sometimes it also is for non-residents of the property. So maybe home healthcare workers who are working full-time or live in help, relatives who come frequently to stay with aging parents or what have you. So there's a couple of different needs we have here. We're also looking on introducing a digital hardship parking program for short-term drivers. So this would be, or parkers, I guess. This would be able, so we, instead of just having a one-size-fits-all solution, we can look at daily, weekly, monthly options based on people's needs, because maybe they're only there 3 days a week and they don't need parking every day. And that could be a way to better plan for the amount of parking we have and the parking passes that we give out. One of the things we can also do right now in New York State, you can't designate on-street parking for residents only without passing legislation that has to be done at the state level. It is something that we can consider looking into, something that we should look towards. It's not necessarily the shortest term solution. We're really working on the inventory right now, making sure that people who have the passes are legitimately have them, and looking for ways to keep that number manageable, make sure the people who need the parking are the ones who are getting the parking. So I want to include our staff in this discussion. So you're all welcome to come up to the table. On this trip, Joe Agostinelli, our building inspector, Brendan Donahue, captain of the police force, and Paul Fraioli were there too. So if you have any questions, if the board has any questions, I thought it would be good to take each issue, talk it through, get some direction from the trustees, and then we'll have next steps, and we'll be reporting back to you in some time frame on the progress.
Hello, folks. Is that it?
Yeah, so I think it's best if we just sort of talk about each issue. There's 3 issues, and I think probably it's best if we talk about each one, and we'll move on to the next issue once we sort of talk about this way. That way we can keep it organized, and that works.
Okay. There were a couple of pieces. So you just want to, you're presenting right now just the parking piece.
Right now, we're talking about the on-street parking, and I
Okay.
think it just will be helpful to us as like, just talk about each things discreetly so that we have specific guidance and next, direction on these issues as we go through it, and then we can do a summary conversation too.
Okay. So I don't know who goes first, but let me just share my observations. First of all, we did the tour was something I had requested a few months ago. We had some residents who complained specifically about that area. Their complaint actually wasn't just about the parking, which, in many river towns, we have a lot of issues with that. And as housing demand keeps outstripping supply, it will continue to be a problem for many, many years. It's been a problem for decades. So everybody tries to wrestle with it, every community as best it can. There's no great golden, bullets out there to deal with it. There's just like hard work and figuring out what the best solution is for the next few years. So the reason we did this wasn't just about the parking, was actually about the inability to make turns onto those streets, because there's so many cars parked there that cars actually, they're two-way streets, some of them. And we, by actually going and looking at, we all know what our community looks like. All of us live here, many, but not all the staff live here, but those that don't live here know it better than some of us because they work here full-time. They know every street by its name, the residents, the businesses, et cetera. So it wasn't to go look at it. It was to be together and say, look, people complain that you can't make a right turn because it's too narrow. Now I have a relatively small Chevy, and I remember going up, probably Havel, I couldn't make the turn, and the schools are up the street in some cases. So when the school buses are going through, our tour bus actually couldn't make one of the turns. He had to back up and go and try a couple of times. So it's not safe was really what the conversation was. And sometimes when you staff, and we don't do this often, in fact, I don't think we've ever actually done this before. I mean, I think it could have been done a little differently, but I mean, all in all, I think we learned a lot from it. So we'll see the other two issues. So parking. My quick observations were the streets with people parking and a two-way street, there just is not enough linear feet on those streets. This community was built, much of it in the 1800s, some of it 1900s, early 1900s, mid, late. Many were built as houses. Some were built maybe for a couple of families. Now there might be 4 to 6 families. I mean, you could see the mailboxes. You could see people coming and going. They're very close to the edge. It's not like a big area for people. So my observation was there's only so much linear feet. There are a lot of people living there, and there's not enough parking for all the people living there. So there's some due diligence. What do you do for houses that don't have parking? What do you do for houses that actually have ability to park, but somehow decided to close off or expand their houses? So by choice, they've created no parking, and people who live there have to park on the street. That's a different scenario. And Joe has said this to us before. If people are supposed to have parking and there is space for it, they're not supposed to block that off. So there is what I call like a little cleaning up that I think Karen was describing it more eloquently. But you all know me when I speak, plain English is always my forte. We need to make sure that those that can park, fix up their whatever driveways, put them back the way they're supposed to if they can, and park cars there and not use them for anything else but the cars of the people living in those homes on that property. There are also people that many people living in things that were housing that was not built for that many people. We have to look at that. That's a complicated issue because people have to have a place to live. But how we manage one of the things you didn't talk about, but it could be a solution like it is in urban areas. The fact that you rent on one main street doesn't mean you have to park on one main street. It is possible to start thinking about parking where people might have to walk 10 minutes to their car, or that there's some sort of shuttles later on, always been discussed here. But we should think a little bit about remote parking, because for those of us that lived in New York, rarely do you actually have parking near where you live. You usually have to walk 10, 15, 20 minutes. And it's the same weather conditions. So the fact that it rains and you don't want to get wet, well, nobody in Queens wants to get wet either, but that's the way it goes, or in Manhattan. So I do think we have to speak a little bit more, is like my observation is if we could find a solution. We're not gonna be able to do anything about the schools unless the schools move somewhere else. There are school buses there. School buses tend to be a little wide. You got kids on the school buses. They gotta make it up the hills. You gotta plow the snow. So we do have an issue there. We have to enforce, the police have to ticket people who are parked illegally, parking people's driveways. There's gotta be a better word than clean up, but only those that should have permits should be permitted to park. So we also have to figure out a better way to give out the parking. Because we have a sense, but we don't know for a fact, that we may be giving more people than we should, or that should be getting permits to park. We're giving too many of them out. We're not collecting things at the end. I know we're automating everything, and I know that's gonna get better, but that's an area that needs to be discussed. We're gonna go beyond parking. But you can't make more linear feet out of a road. Linear feet is linear feet. So we sort of have to play a little bit more with supply and demand on the parking. And we do have to, at some point, we're gonna have to talk to the school about the use of their property as well. But we are gonna have to look at people that are gonna have to walk a little bit. And if they have 5 cars in, for an apartment, out of 4 apartments, 2 or 3 of those people may need a ride from other people in that apartment. They're gonna have to find another parking 10, 15 minutes away. Maybe a solution. I'm not saying that's what's gonna happen. We're here to discuss some issues and some solutions that might be available. I did not see, which I do see around the community, a lot of commercial vehicles parked on the street or driveways. That's actually illegal throughout this village, is to park commercial vehicles overnight. I didn't see a lot. Could have been a little early for that. I'm looking at you, Joe, because you're so familiar with this. I'm looking at you, Captain, because I don't know what happens at night because we went at 6 o'clock. But that's something else that we're gonna have, because that's actually already illegal, that people parking commercial vehicles. And that will alleviate maybe a few percentages of the cars parked. But it's a tight fit there, and this was on a nice summer evening, without snow and rain and all the other stuff that happens. Do you have any from that, just regarding parking?
I have a question about commercial vehicles. Where are they supposed to, I'm just curious, because they're not supposed to park in a lot of places, but where are they supposed
supposed
to
to
go?
park
Are
in
there specific
residential.
lots for them? Oh, residential.
Well, I mean, if you're asking me, one of the solutions is, like many businesses, you're supposed to pay for your parking. People who have landscaping trucks and live in a residential home should find some place to park their vehicle, like most businesses do. The lumber yards park their vehicles because they pay for the property. So you're not supposed to use like my space for parking when I'm your neighbor for your business. You're running a business. Part of your cost should be to park your vehicle. It's
Okay.
very
No,
common.
I'm just curious. I,
No,
it's something I think,
listen.
I mean, I see a lot of commercial
Self-employed
vehicles
people.
parked in houses on my street. So I don't know,
Yep.
I guess,
That's not a new thing though, right? That law's been in place for a very long time. It's very common.
Joe, you're gonna
Joe?
need to put a
One of
microphone.
those mics. I feel like we're missing a mic.
Right now in the residential districts, you can have up to one vehicle up to 20 feet. So it allows, let's say, a person who's a plumber who's on call to have one work van on his property. So if he has to, leave and go out to something at 2 o'clock in the morning, he's allowed to have one. But beyond that, you're not supposed to have any other commercial vehicles, none over 20 feet and not multiple.
And are you allowed to park them on the street?
No, well, that's the regulations of the zoning for parking on your property.
Yes, but not on the street.
Not that I'm aware of on the street. No.
Okay,
No, not between 3 and 6 a.m.
right, just like any other car.
Right.
Yeah, none of us are supposed to park in certain areas. Some areas you're allowed to.
Correct.
Okay. Exactly, okay. So I should correct my language a little bit because I said nowhere, but actually it's based on the zones. That's more accurate. And we can look at that as well, about can we find a solution for all the self-employed people, plumbers, house cleaning services, landscaping trucks.
Yeah.
Microphone.
I mean, we're a village of working people and
Yeah.
with trucks. And I'm just curious as to what kind of solution there would be to that and where the trucks would be parked. And if you live in a residential area and you have a, let's say, masonry business, where do you put your trucks if you can't park them on your property? So it's just something I've long been curious about.
This is part of the role, is to find some solutions. Not everything has a solution, as we've learned. But one could argue that the reason other communities don't have so many of these kind of trucks is because people won't rent in those communities because they know that they will be ticketed and towed. And so it's like a catch-22 situation, but not that anything's easy, but we can put our thinking caps in. I was saying to Karen that actually, if we can find solutions to 10% of a problem or 15%, it's a huge move on the needle. Not here to solve world hunger, but we certainly could try to figure out a few solutions that are reasonable.
One we did speak about, I think
Please.
the other day was to look at some of the areas right now where they don't allow any on-street parking.
Mhm.
That maybe they can be added to additional space, like you can park cars overnight on Dale Avenue, but not on Pine, but maybe up to a certain point on Pine Avenue where it's accommodates to allow traffic through parking, to add those as additional parking. So if you live on Dale Avenue, like you said, Mayor, you may not be able to park right in front of your house, but maybe you're parking, a short walk
Yeah.
away.
So if you were asked me to vote on that idea, I would probably vote no on that. That doesn't mean everybody will. So what I've learned is when you widen roads, more cars go on them. And what I've learned is that when you build more here, the landlords will simply raise their rates and advertise that there's plenty of parking, limited parking. And so the bad players always find those spots, and the people that really need the house, where they live, where they really can't park, aren't going to get anything out of it. In my opinion, creating more spaces on other streets is simply kicking the can. It is not, because one of the problems is that we have people renting out housing and apartments and advertising that there's on-street parking. And we're never going to stop that. But creating more of that just means, instead of 3 families, there'll be 4 or 5 families. You build a wider highway. Ask people who live in Long Island. Never has expanding the highway created less traffic on 495. Never in the past 40 years. The only thing they did that was intelligence, created an emergency lane that you're not allowed to go on, because when people would have accident, we back everything up into Queens. It did not reduce traffic at all. It actually increased the traffic and more housing was built because now more people said, oh, it's an hour commute, I could do it. It's a big debate about that. I would really like to solve first for only people that should have permits should get them. Where do guests park when there's, a birthday and there are 40 cars because somebody's celebrating something, and where should they park? And make sure that people that have driveways who've basically closed them up and decided to have a bigger backyard, who are landlords, and make their tenants park on the street or charge people for that. So then they park on the street, all of that stuff. I think it's more important to first fix that and then start having conversation about how we manage. Because what I learned, unfortunately, much to my dismay, is in New York, and I guess all over the country, I would like to create an area for only those people that live in a residence. Other countries do that. They put a red line, they put a yellow line. So it's only people living on that block. No one else can be there. We're not allowed to do it, apparently. Not from a local government. That's what I've been told. We're not allowed to segregate people.
If you get local legislation. Microphone. I don't have a microphone.
How is it that, I'm
But I
telling
can
you, we're
scream.
short like microphones tonight. This is
If
weird.
you obtain special legislation from the state allowing you to set up a residential parking permit system, you can do that. It's done by about 15 municipalities throughout New York.
Might be worth it.
Okay?
Is it for residents only, or it's just the?
It would be
it's just-
residents you have to designate the streets.
Right,
And you have to indicate the hours. You also have to either do one of 2 things. 20% have to be available to whoever wants to park.
Understood.
Or you just basically say, as I believe Mount Kisco does, those streets, you can park for up to 4 hours without a permit. But basically you can do that. And it's done a lot throughout Westchester, as I've discussed with Maddie, but you also see it in Albany, Buffalo, Rensselaer, you see it in Ithaca, where basically they say
the same
these
problem.
streets. And
Yeah.
what you do is in those streets, it's called a residential permit system,
Oh.
but can only be done through an act of the state legislature, because otherwise you can't limit people to where they park.
Right, so I didn't understand that, so this is great, because this, I think, would actually solve, because it sounds like you could go and designate, is it a zone or the streets? Like, do you actually say Apple Street, Maple Street?
You
or
actually say the streets.
Interesting, interesting idea. Interesting for maybe helping also with some of the
So-
commercial working, because
Well,
you
just keep
do
in
it.
mind that, you know,
You need a state
Sleepy
legislature.
Hollow and I believe Tarrytown have something similar already. What do they not have is commercial vehicles,
Mhm.
and it's for a reason. You know, to sort of to answer your question, Dana, when you become an owner in a business like that, because I have spoke to landscapers and construction guys, you know,
Mhm.
a lot of them live in Spring Street. They have material
Mhm.
and they need a yard.
Mhm.
So they usually go, up north, where there's more room, where they rent yards. They subdivide yards. So
North
they're
of
supposed,
Ossining?
yeah, north of
Yeah, it's like
Austin,
they're
Cronin,
commercial lots
Eastfield.
for.
So there's more land. Even in the town of Austin, there's a couple lots in there where
Yeah.
people rent.
Yeah.
And they actually, the ability
Have
for
to
them
get
to
to
go
them.
there. Yeah, but if I'm a worker, I drive to work, sure. So it's the same concept. Or sometimes what they do is what I see a lot in so my neighborhood is they go there and the owner or whoever's the supervisor comes in and picks them up. But there's other ones like Joe was mentioning, they're plumbers, electricians, they do allow a vehicle to be parking there. But what we try to limit, and I will hate to see our streets full of dump trucks parking on
Right.
streets, because what we're trying to do is give it to the residents, not
Right.
to those kind of vehicles. That's all.
It's a business. You own a restaurant, you pay less rent for a restaurant without parking than you do for restaurants with parking spaces. And restaurateurs sit there and go, oh, my clients say I don't have a place to park. Well, the answer is you could have bought a place. You could have rented a place that does have a parking lot. Others have. These are the trade-offs and the cost of doing business. And electricians are running a business, so are plumbers, so is everybody else. But I think this might be something we should pursue, because in much of our community, we do look a little bit more urban than other Westchester communities, and even the town of Ossining. We're a little bit more urbanized, and this would fit nicely with what is already available. So this was great. I misunderstood when I asked the question. So already I feel like there's maybe another idea right here.
If I may, just quickly. No,
Please.
I may not.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Why does she know what you're going to say?
No, I was just going to mention that when we did the parking study with Nelson Nygaard, they did sort of give us some background information on this. And, it sounds as though it's, maybe not as easy a process as just like, hey, state legislator, can we do this? But we have the backup material. So we can, certainly start looking into that if that's what the
The
board would like us
average
to do.
time it takes for our state legislators, and it doesn't matter who's there, doesn't matter what party, and it doesn't matter who they are, from what I have heard, is 8 years to pass a piece of legislation at the state
So,
level.
I don't know
But
that,
I'm willing to start
have-
today and
I
have it
have-
happen in 8 years. I mean, got to start somewhere.
so I think this falls into, we do have some longer term strategies that we can implement, but some shorter terms too. So, and I think this helps clarify that the direction we're going appears to be the right one. While at some point we may decide that we want to reconfigure where we have overnight parking, not necessarily expand, but reconfigure based on congestion, based on need, based on other things. Really, the first step, and I think we're all in agreement, is to make sure we're mitigating any abuses, and really tightening our practices, our enforcement and our policies as we can within our current legislation, to make sure that the people who actually need the parking spaces are getting the parking spaces. So we can probably do some work on that. That's already in process that we're starting to do. So hopefully we'll see some mitigation of this issue. Certainly in a parallel path, though, we can start the process of pursuing state legislation.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if we started 7 years ago, we probably have it by now. So I'm not being cute. It takes time. There are hundreds of pieces of laws they're trying to pass,
So
but let's get it in the
so
queue.
can I, so,
You're
and
not
whenever, please, 8 years seems like nothing. So I guess one request, because I did get a couple of messages this week and over the weekend in regards to the hardship application and how lengthy it is, which is 5 pages for something like this. It almost reminds me it's getting a building permit in a way, you know? So if we're gonna try to move forward to a digital format, try to make it shorter, it's simpler, with information just is just required to get this hardship portion of it, or if we still have it as a PDF, it should be a simplified form. It should not be 5 pages. You know, I think we can do better than that. So I'm not sure if we're done with that, but I'd be curious to go to the next slide where we're talking about Havel and
Traffic.
Yale.
Yes.
You know,
So,
This is
so I
actually
wanted
the
to, we
impetus
wanted,
for the whole thing.
what we really found, no matter where we were on our trip, the issue of hardship parking just came up and up. So we wanted to just, that's sort of an overarching issue that's somewhat village-wide. When we talk,
Just also say, in addition to what Manny was just saying, what is the definition of hardship parking?
it's, I'm not going to read it right out of the code, but basically, if you do not have any opportunity to have on-street parking because your property does not
Right.
have
So
that.
that's
is
what I
considered-
thought it was. Wanted it into right.
Am I missing
No,
any
you're
part
not.
of that? No.
Here's the thing, most people, when they think you're talking about hardship parking, think you're talking about handicapped people. Because when I've had that conversation, go, oh, well, they're hardship, probably in a wheelchair, you can't make them walk. I'm like, no, that's not what a hardship parking is. Sounds like it would be for handicapped people, et cetera. Is there a different way to call hardship? Because the fact that you don't have a parking for a 2-family or 3-family isn't actually a hardship. It is like you don't have parking, like, you know, about 20% to 50%.
We
Oh,
can, I
okay.
mean, we.
I
we
think
did
it's
say
not a-
on-street overnight parking, I think
Yeah.
is more generally
It's more-
easily
yeah.
understood.
I thought it was something about it has to be hardship because in New York State, you can't park on the public right of way unless you have a hardship. So that's not local language, it's state language.
So,
you
yeah,
want to, you may want to be very extra careful unless
Well,
we
let's look into
change,
it.
unless we go to legislator and ask them to
so
do
the
this. But yeah.
hardship element of it is a legal term to qualify somebody. When we talk about the parking, we can talk about it as overnight parking, on-street parking. That's due to the
Yeah.
fact, but the qualification would be based on the hardships, the hardship requirements that enable you to park on.
Yeah, I just want to get
property.
confirmation that that is the only word we can use for this.
I think that we can use it in a more limited way to make sure that we're meeting the legal requirements. So one of the issues, and this should come as a surprise to no one, is that traveling on Howell Street or Yale Avenue is challenging, especially if there's an oncoming car while you're driving. So we know that these streets are narrow. And because we have on-street parking, that also sometimes creates really challenging, almost impassable traffic conditions. So for a solution, again, in conjunction with some of the overarching on-street parking permit remedies that we just talked about, we need to really think about for measures of safety and well-being, reconfiguring traffic flow to better accommodate local traffic on these streets where there may be a couple others in the village, but these two are really the most challenging. So over time, again, these are all things that we've talked about. We've also talked about remedies that we can do that would increase parking in certain areas, particularly around Havel Street, and things that we can do in conjunction with the road diet. Those are already things we're looking at again, but we're trying to, move as quickly as we can. Although the road diet, we did get word from the state that we'll be able to move forward with that's getting on the
It'll create a
transportation
few,
improvement
it'll
list,
create
so
a
we're
few
moving forward.
spots.
So it'll also give us options to address the flow issues and study that. So for both Havel and Yale Avenue, we're talking about limiting traffic in one way for all or part of the streets. Either on Havel Street, it would be either eastbound or westbound, and we'd have to really look at which made the most sense. And similarly on Yale, it would be northbound or southbound, be based on what made most sense, if these make sense at all. Obviously, we'd be working with the school district on Havel Street because that's a bus route. And, the other options are eliminating parking, but that really would probably be very difficult to do for the people who live in those areas. So these are things that we are studying in conjunction with the road diet, but we need to study them regardless, because these are, these roads exit onto a state road. So the state, as Paul has advised me, would require a study. And Paul, maybe you want to talk about some of the implications of that in the context of the, Paul and I are working on a traffic study, a very limited scope traffic study for some hard, difficult places in Austin, but this is an opportunity, if the board wishes, to perhaps expand that.
Yeah, thank you. Before Paul goes, just people watch this later on, whatever. These are not the only two streets. These are streets that constituents have come and said, look, it's just getting worse. In the 90s, the board allowed a bunch of single-family homes to be built too. It's not just the multi-units. There's also single-family homes where they didn't used to be. And so that also created more cars, more people. So I just want to be clear that this is like, we're not picking on this area. We're simply is an area that we think, based on constituent feedback, is challenging. And there's also commercial, for those that don't know what we're talking about. It butts up against Route 9, where there is, longstanding commerce, auto repair shops that are quite busy, et cetera. I mean, they have their businesses there and they need to be able to get their cars in and out, et cetera, et cetera. Paul?
So, pending what the manager stated, the work that we're going to be proceeding with hopefully later this year into next year with regard to the road diet study is a study necessary in advance of any work that we hope to undertake on the state road. We've already have the concurrence with the state DOT regional office that we can proceed with that study with the intent of a capital project, which is going to be inclusive of new traffic patterns and such at all intersections and the road itself from the limits that the manager already discussed. One of the things that we would have done a study anyway, because it's very intricate, but even if we didn't want to do a study and we just wanted to make some adjustments like we're doing on the intersection at Spring and Main, for example, right now, we wouldn't be able to do that without presenting a full-blown traffic study and have the reasoning behind our mindset of changing it to a single lane in each direction with turning lanes and pedestrian safety improvements, et cetera. The state wants to see a full study, comprehensive study of the corridor before we touch anything. And these two roads that the manager mentioned are both tributary to Route 9 and therefore would require a study of the same before we made any changes to them. Even if we didn't make any hardscape changes, if we made directional changes, they also want to know what the impact is, because it does have an impact. If you, for example, tell everybody that, you can make the right off of Route 9 going north onto Yale Avenue to go up Yale Avenue, but no longer can you come down Yale Avenue. Those folks are going to go somewhere else to access wherever they're going to go, and they want to see the impact on the tributary roads. Are they going out through Route 9? Are they going to run through the local roads? Are they going to take another road to get to Highland Avenue? All that needs to be documented and considered before we go make any changes hastily. So in that vein, that's why we brought forth the study, and we'll go from there.
The study's not budgeted for yet. This is a new study, correct? Or is it being now added to the Route 9 diet?
The Route 9 road diet is, I believe, funded. The majority of that's going to be funded with the grant that we
Yes,
applied
but
for.
can this, because it's right off of Route 9, be included in that, or is this a separate? Do you know?
Well, what the manager and I discussed was the potential, once we get this study approved and the grant finalized, was possibly taking off that section of the area near Havel and possibly requesting of the state that we study it cohesively, but separate. So it will be in the scope of our project, but we might want to put it on a separate critical path to address some local issues, as long as they know it's done with the project in mind.
Okay, so that's gonna come in front of us at some point, yeah? Tonight, we're just having conversation, it's a work session, we're just having like a yay, nay, like, does this sound like a good idea or not, right? This is what we're doing here tonight.
So I'm going to start with the disclaimer that I hate part of the study because we know the issues. It should be a simple solution.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the beginning of what you said.
So I said, I'm going to start with a disclaimer that I hate studies like this because we know the problem. You know, we should not having to do a study to prove that this is the reasons why we as a community know what the problems are. And I'm just direct, I'm talking to you because you're in front of me. This is just a general statement, Paul. But I understand the reason why. Unfortunately, the state wants to see a study that makes no sense to them, but makes more sense to us in reality. So now I'm going to go to the part that you said, that was said actually in parts of the logistics of the study itself. It was mentioned that we're going to be whatever directions, either southbound or northbound or east or westbound is going to be taken on this, we're going to be talking to the schools. So on part of the tour that we took, I asked the question, how many times does the school coordinates things with us? And I believe the answer, if I'm correct, was not that much. There's not that much collaboration that they report to us and some of this stuff. So my concern is that two things, sure. I just got I saw a posting, I guess, that the routes, the bus school routes are going to be emailing to people, I think, by next month for next year. So if the routes are already planned and we're going to start doing this study at some point, maybe this year, how is that going to affect and when are we planning to do these implementations of this proposed study for this particular to these two particular streets? Are we talking about in the plan of the next 3 years? Is that more or less?
Are you gonna, I
I'm
can
a- I'm
address
asking a
one at a
general
time, I don't
question.
know.
I'm asking a general.
Yeah, I just
question.
wanted you to
If
finish.
whoever- Yeah, whoever
I
wants to
think the
answer.
question
So the first,
is timing, correct?
Yeah, I
timing.
mean,
So
how
the
long does
first-
a study like this takes and when is the implementation going to take place, if any?
all right, so I got two questions, I think, from what you asked. I'll try to answer them. If not, you can continue to ask me more details. I understand. Sometimes it's looked at as a bureaucratic layer that could be frustrating sometimes, but I will say, I think we've all been doing this long enough to know that bureaucracy is like a double-edged sword. It has its benefits as well, including, coverage from liability perspective and such. So when things do get done, there's a record of why we did them, who okayed it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where if we don't get all those ducks in order and then something happens and they go to look around, not having our Ts crossed and Is dotted could put the village in a position where, we'd be doing more work with Stewart's office than my office, and we don't want that. As far as the schools and interaction with the schools, I think, I don't want to say they haven't like partnered with us. I think the relationship could be beneficial, but quite frankly, taking Havel specific, I don't think, there's been many discussions about it in my tenure here, but I don't think any of them have ever elevated to the point where we were really ready to go to the school district or anybody else with a formidable plan, other than just
Can I
talk
pause you
here.
for a minute?
So-
So can I pause you for that for
Sure.
a minute? So the high school, they did this whole, revamping of the entrance and exits, through pretty much on the whole high school. Was that ever communicated with your department or with the police department at all at any time that you know? Because that affects the traffic flow, sure, on our local streets.
Yeah,
I'm asking a
it was
question.
it was a while ago, and quite frankly, I don't recall if I interacted with the school district. I knew they were doing it when they were doing that work on Walden Road, if that's what you're referring
I'm gonna
to.
ask the captain, were you aware, was your department aware that
the
they,
chief was
or the
sitting over
chief, whoever
Yes.
wants to?
Yeah, I know there was
So-
coordination.
So there was a coordination with you guys.
Yes.
Okay. What kind of coordination, if you don't mind asking?
Discussion and inputs. We also assisted with drone photography and things and part of the planning for the route and layout.
Okay, but you were not part of that discussion, more or less? Doesn't seem like it, sure. Okay, so our village
Nor do I-
engineer was not.
Well, again, I don't really know if,
I understand.
based on
that
what they
part.
did, it was necessary.
I understand. I got my answer with that, but go ahead, continue, please.
Well, I was sort of wrapped up there. I mean, to answer your two questions, yeah.
I just want to make it clear though, Manny,
Just the time frame. You didn't answer the time frame. More or less, how long a study like this will take and when the implementation will be. Sorry, Mayor.
no, is it a year? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 years? What is your estimation based on your many years of doing this?
I think our study and conceptual design to be submitted to the state is probably going to be less than a year. I think they want to get a full cycle of traffic, surely, with all the seasons and when they're in school and when they're not in school and what have you. I don't think the timeframe of the state is very predictable. It's a tough thing to
But not less than a year?
doubt. I doubt that.
So it's a 3-year event. But year 1 for us, year 1 to maybe year 1.5 state, maybe average. And
This
then
might-
year for implementation. It looks like a 3-year,
Well-
3.5-year deal.
I think the advantage we might have with this is I think the grant has a drawdown requirement on it, and I don't
Oh,
want to
okay.
expand on that too much, and that might help us kind of push the state along with,
Yeah, but it's not 6 months and it's not this coming school year. That would be a fair statement, I
it's-
think.
yes.
So I think there's like two ways to look at this. One of the things is that when we initially talked about it, we said, well, like what can we do? You
Right.
know, the road diet funds must be expended by 2026. So, that does, that's 3 years.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
hope, what it looks like, the way this is moving, that probably the timing of the road diet being able to focus a little bit more on these areas, like we'll be able to do this work, that it looks like it's going to line up. I don't know if we would do it that much faster than when we actually do the road diet at this point anyway. However, when we were initially talking about, it, we weren't really sure what that timing was going to be. So we've just gotten word from the state that, knock wood, these things seem to be moving forward. We just want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that makes sense and that we're not, pushing this stuff too far down the road, but we're also sensitive to the fact that we do have several layers of bureaucracy that need to
Right.
be addressed.
Look, I think the good thing, Manny, and we've learned this, you more than anybody, really. So many boards just won't deal with this stuff. It's heavy, it's big. You change things, someone's going to be unhappy. I mean, in my guess, in this scenario, half the people are going to be happy and half the people will be very angry. It's one of those scenarios where people got used to, however they got used to things. You're making some changes, who asked for it and why didn't you include this person and that person and this group and that group and all of that. And so many political bodies just don't want to deal with this. But because they haven't wanted to deal with a number of issues, at the very least, we get stuff documented. We're sorely lacking in documentation. Every time I ask a question, how many parking spaces do we have in the whole village? How many miles of this? Everybody starts all over again because there's, in the last 10 years, we've probably done more documentation than 30 years before that. And we know when we did the comprehensive plan in 2009, I was not involved in that at all. But I heard horror stories of just like basic information wasn't available, like that you just assumed was, because it's not a great job of memorializing things. So the worst case scenario of this is we do a study, we memorialize some stuff, and then we chunk it out and we say, we're not going to do all of this. The state, some of this is not state roads. The schools are changing because they have another committee and they're going to do this or they're going to do that. I'm not saying what, because then I'll get quoted. They're also in motion. It's not just us involved in things. Still all of a sudden make something happen that affects us. So I think getting that going and at least saying, you know what, we'll do this chunk of the study. This other stuff, we're not going to be able to do it. That would be a big move on the needle to move forward to get some of this stuff solved, because it's actually a problem. Some things, I always wonder what problem are we really solving for, but this one really is a safety of fire engines, it's an issue. It's not just so we can make places look pretty. I mean, it's an actual safety issue. So I know that, and I know it's
Yeah.
frustrating because
believe me, I've been part of a lot of studies and a lot of
Like
that
for
stuff
years,
is just
I
still sitting
know.
in the shelves. So I'm gonna ask you this, and please keep this in mind. So when you guys do the study for Havel, take a look at, we got a complaint sometime a couple years back where we have overnight parking pretty much all the way up to the cemetery,
Right.
where it kind of just doesn't make any sense and a lot of this stuff. Because if we're looking to do, so this is my 2 cents, and I know I have said this before, one-way street to Sabrina Lane and just kind of keep it as a two-way street. But because we wanted to keep it as a two-way street, if we keep the overnight parking along Havel Street that goes all the way up, it limits the width of the street as well. So keep that in mind. That's all I'm gonna say.
Anything else? I mean, we'll get more comments. This is really a follow-up to a conversation that started and, you know, one step at a time, people. What else you got?
So Jamie, if you could just go on to the next slide. So the,
Oh, excuse me, on the schools, before we get misquoted. So everybody understands, go on the record, the school system does not, unlike every other entity, that must actually go through the village and the building department for permits and all that stuff, which is why we know what's going on. They do not go through the village. This isn't about partnerships or any other thing. They go through the Department of Education, which is a state agency. They do not go for permits through the building department or the village of Ossining. So if somebody says, how come you didn't know? Or they did something nefarious? No, they didn't do anything nefarious, and no, we don't know. And that's the reason. They report to an entire different structure. People always assume that, like everybody else, they have to get a permit, they have to do this. They actually don't.
thank you for that.
They
clarification.
do, but they go through the state. They do get
Well, they
permits,
do
yeah.
get permits, excuse me, but through the
Yes.
state
state
education,
A-
not through
a
the village of
different
Ossining.
entity,
A different
yes.
entity, correct.
Thank you for that clarification. So the third issue that we addressed on our trip was property maintenance issues.
Mm.
And we all know that we have chronic property issues of noncompliance and neglect in specific neighborhoods throughout the village. But one of the areas that we get a lot of complaints about is Croton Avenue, and there's specific properties on Croton Avenue that have been vacant for a long time. And this, this is disappointing for everybody involved. So our solution is that we really would like to be able to strengthen our ability to enforce code violations effectively. And it's the ability and the ability to identify and make changes to property maintenance and code, property maintenance code and village processes allow for more independent action, penalties enforcement to be done by the building department or corporation council. So this is something that we've talked about. Again, nothing here we're bringing up is new. It's just these are sort of problems that have persisted, partly because of bureaucracy, partly because, there's no one easy solution to everything. What we did provide to the board separately was a list of the properties, the commercial properties on Croton Avenue that are sort of in a chronic state of non-compliance, and where the status is. It's not that we're not aware of it. It's not that we've not issued violations, but the process for this, we do have a due process, and there are things we can do and there are things that we can't do. And, I think we're all well aware and that we've had those conversations. So internally and things that we'd like to bring to the board, or maybe, ways that we can get a little bit more enforcement capacity within the village itself. And I don't know if Stuart or Joe want to speak to that.
Thank you, manager. Many of the properties in the village that were on the list are listed as vacant. A number of them are in foreclosure, and there are procedures under state law to require the servicer to take certain actions to protect the property. Efforts to contact the servicer or get things done are not simple. Generally, you're talking to different people. Both I am, and I know that Greg Gross and Joe are doing that from the building department end. So you have the vacant building issue. And that is something that needs to be looked at. We have a number of properties where it is in the owner's interest to violate the law. They are basically making money to park vehicles, to do other things at the property. And they have no intention of going before a land use board. They have no intention of doing anything. And we intend to seek the highest possible fine. We are daily diarying that they are in violation. Whether the court imposes the fine is obviously something that the court would decide on its own. We do have a number of properties where in any event, we can go to the court in White Plains to compel certain work to be done. One of the properties that was on the list is 20 Maple Place. That's a difficult property because the owner is deceased and the bank is in the process of trying to get an administrator appointed for the estate. So they can't proceed with the foreclosure until someone is appointed. The former owner, I believe, Joe, has been deceased for about 2 years. So it's unfortunately, it might be M&T. I'm not sure. I would have
So
to check
is all of this public information that's
That-
publishable?
that it's in foreclosure.
Yeah.
All you gotta
And who the
do,
bank is that holds this and
well,
2 years now?
who's actually holding it? The answer to all of your questions, Mayor, is yes. If you check the Westchester County Clerk's site, you can find out who the owner is, who the bank is, who the attorney for the bank is, the amount of the loan, all that can be found. So, we know all that, we know of all that information. So that occurs there. With regard to, other maintenance issues, the most significant that I see, because, Sonia, my deputy, and I review all the orders to remedy and appearance tickets. The most significant defects are those where owners are converting the property from a 1 to a 2 to a 2 to a 5 to a 5 to a 7. And they're doing it without permits. They're doing it without telling anybody what they're doing, except that they're renting all either individual rooms or they're turning it into new apartments. They have no electrical, they have no plumbing, they have no permits for anything. And the difficulty, of course, with that is that we are in the position of essentially having to placard the units to get the people out, because without the permits, we can't do anything. It's a difficult circumstance. Sometimes tenants will let us in to actually see what's going on because they're the ones that are making the complaints. But many times the owner will tell the tenant, don't let them in. And in that circumstance, we would have to get a warrant to allow us to enter. But that's the most serious issue that we have is dealing with units that are simply, if you want to call it, created out of straw. And it's problematic for police. It's problematic for the fire department. We need to be able to enforce the placards. We need to be able to basically keep people out. We know we have a number of buildings where there are squatters who are living there. And I think one thing that will need to be done is that the village, and we have to look at this, to be in a situation of basically fencing the property off itself and then putting that money onto the next property tax bill. Yonkers does that all the time. And they basically, they'll close it up. And I think we have circumstances where that simply needs to be done because we have enough buildings where we have that is a problem. But the multiple dwellings that are created out of single units or single apartments or whatever is the biggest problem. There are some owners who are doing this because basically they can't afford to live in a house unless they do it, to be honest. And we've had one or two, folks who have told us that. We have one individual who essentially has their aide living upstairs in a created unit and has rented the downstairs. But it's still an illegal unit and it creates a problem all along. We write it, we go to court, we endeavor to get these things, pushed along. Many of the property owners will say, well, I don't have enough money to get an architect. I don't have enough money to do this. The simple fact of the matter is then we got to close the unit up. We have no alternative to do that. Today I was advised there's a place where it's approved as a studio, but they've essentially created a second bedroom. Well, we got to close the bedroom off. I mean, we have no choice. If they've rented it, they've rented it, but we've got to close it. That's to me, and Joe sees it far more than I do. I only see it from the appearance ticket end. My perspective is that that's the most significant issue we have. To be honest, if they've got siding coming off their house, I know it's a violation. The truth be told, I'm not going to worry about it as much. But we write the tickets, we write the appearance tickets, and that creates an added burden on my office because we then have to prepare it for trial. And under the new discovery rules, I've got to basically have it ready for trial within 30 days. So it's an added burden, but we deal with that. But the real issue are these units that are essentially created out of nothing. Plus, we have a few large residential properties, multifamily, where we just have landlords who are, simply to put it, unresponsive. One of those buildings, in fact, is coming before you a little later tonight. And that's, if you want to call it, that's the big ticket items. That's, as I said, if we have a building where it's supposed to be 69 and the 6 has fallen down and it says 99, okay, I might tell the code enforcement officer, just knock on the door. Don't even write the OTR. But where we're dealing with what is essentially a life safety issue, and I recognize that in some of these buildings, they may actually have gotten all the electrical, but if we don't know, it is basically unsafe and it's got to be closed. That's all.
Because also the fire department doesn't know when they walk into these.
Well, and they don't know if it's, we had one, I think that was, they made 6 or 7 rooms and they were renting the rooms.
Yeah.
No, we had no plans for that. So it's, the only thing that can be done is close it, get the people out and make sure they don't come back. That's, and what we do is we change the locks. And sometimes we've had owners who literally break the locks
Yeah.
and let the people back in.
So
do.
just to put it in proportion, you mentioned 3 big chunks. One is commercial buildings. They might be residential and commercial that have been vacant, that people have been complaining on Croton.
Right.
That are just ignoring us at this point, making money off of whatever they're making money by renting it to commercial vehicles or whatever else they're doing. And one of the guys had plenty of money to put a very expensive fence up, but apparently no money to pay anything else. So that's one chunk. The other chunk is what you're describing, which is landlords who are creating multiple units. The rents are going for like a couple of grand for a unit, whether it's a 1-bedroom, whatever. The people who talk about screaming poverty that they can't afford, and I've seen them, making $10,000 to $15,000 a month on a place that there's no way they paid that kind of a mortgage when they bought the house 20 years ago or 10. And people that come up here in the past 20 years, if you own residential buildings, I'm going to look sideways when you tell me how you don't make money on it. As a landlord, it's just ridiculous. So I agree with you that we need to figure out a better way to get it and maybe follow some of the cities and what they do. There are those situations, as the woman that you're describing, that have taken their homes as people have aged, because many of our folks here bought houses in the 70s and 80s. They're older, they've got an aid. But for every one of those, there's like 50 that are not like those. So people always like to point to that one person, to the one elderly, to the one handicap, and mention them by name and bring them in here. And we've gone through this. We actually sat through one of these scenarios with an older woman, but the other 50 people living on that block don't have that scenario. And the average rent's a couple of $1,000s for like basically one bedrooms. So it's a lot of money for 7, 8, 9 units per month. So we have to figure it out. It's really amazingly unsafe. Then it goes back to the parking issue because people have cars so they can get to work, and it goes on and on. So as we're discussing property maintenance, what I'm not hearing is solutions to ability to enforce code violations effectively, recommendation to make changes to property maintenance code and village processes. So we've been doing that for quite a while. Is there new ones that you're bringing in front of the board? Like I'm not, because I feel like since I've been a trustee, we've been discussing.
Where we have a few things.
Okay.
One, the housing maintenance code is going to be completely revised because it will then follow the state code. And it's something that I've been working on to essentially what is now what we call Chapter 162. That's essentially going to be almost repealed in full. Some of it will be kept. Most of it will actually go by the boards. And it will tighten up the types of inspections that have to be done, including for operating permits, including for food trucks, including for parking garages, and things like that. In addition, what my office needs to do is very simply to get, and I've said this before, it just hasn't happened, but it will have to happen now, take 5 to 10 places, go, and what we can do is we don't have to go to the courthouse on Spring Street, go directly to State Supreme Court and have the court basically order the owner to do X, Y, or Z. The village also has the option under state law, although the village probably does not want to become the owner, to basically become the owner of the abandoned properties and then sell it, without a mortgage. You can just take and now the law has been changed that you also can do that for commercial properties. So
I'm done with that. I have one in property right now.
Problem
Can we
solved.
just go there tomorrow?
okay, I'll
For the
44
working
State Street.
I'll give you
class,
I'll
If you
give
didn't
you
hear
the,
me, I want 34 State Street.
I'll give you
It's
the
not a
info.
bad idea, Stuart, to the extent that earlier tonight, we are a working community. But, build more parking, create more spaces, blah, blah, blah. Like you've got like a bad building with a bad, it's actually the bad landlord, but there's nothing, the building's not the problem. It's the landlord and the owner. And I'm trying not to be specific since I do know the backstory to a lot of them. I don't want to mention any of the scenarios, but I have not 1 ounce of sympathy for any of these owners, knowing most of them. And their cry for poverty is unacceptable. The owners, not the tenants. So you've got property that we probably, after years of the game that is played with us, to be polite, and we have people who, if they had a place to park, maybe their vans or their commercial vehicle, maybe, that we discussed earlier in the evening, there might be some solution that is reasonable. Frankly, even the guy that is renting out this space, if we could do that legitimately and get rid of that building, that's an eyesore to that area, legitimately, taxation, permits, appropriateness, it's in the code, it probably would make more sense than just ignoring us. And I do, not tonight, but I really would like to start the way communities do with DUI. I do want to start naming the landlords and their addresses and their names and their corporate titles and where they live, if it's public information, in the local paper and on our website. I want these people named, like the guy who lives in Connecticut with his really gorgeous Tesla, who really does not take care of his property in downtown, that I have to look at. And if it's public and we're allowed to do it, I think that there are also some humanistic approaches that we can take and start having people who are good actors understand that they can also be helpful. You see somebody pull up with a truck, and a whole bunch of people moving into a thing that you thought already had two families, call somebody. Don't just sit in your house, call somebody and say, like, there's a truck at Sunday night, all of a sudden more people are moving in, like, I want you to know. A truck is like, got building equipment all of a sudden, like, the community, I think, would also appreciate to know this and to know where we have bad actors. I'm not talking about good actors. I'm not talking about people that have called you and said, look, I'm broke right now. I lost my job. I know I have to do this, because you guys get those calls. And I know that Joe's office is going to sit there and go, look, let's figure out what we can do. 'Cause I'm not talking about those. I am talking about people who repeatedly just continue to behave as bad community members.
One of the things that I've done in a few cases, if the property is mortgaged, we write to the mortgage company, because under the mortgage, you're not allowed to be in violation of local codes. And it is in such, basically, it's a violation of your mortgage, and they can actually call the loan. Hasn't generally gotten action, but here's the point. The owner does not like to know that we're writing to their mortgage company, which is
And they
fine.
probably make more money than that whole mortgage is worth on
Some
a
of them-
monthly
some of-
basis.
Some of them
It's a
do.
big money maker. So anyway, these are some steps. So you're going to be recommending some of this.
Yes.
And
you know,
do you have a
and-
timing on it?
Well, I hope to have the 162 revisions in July to the board. And actually, I want to have it then, because that would occur before we change the zoning code. Because a lot of what we have now in 162 is going to come out and is going to be solely within portions of the zoning code. Another thing that, my deputy and I are doing, and part of it is because the state is requiring us to act so much faster, is to essentially try to move the cases quicker in the justice court, which is not as easy. One of the reasons is that there's generally just one attorney representing almost all of the defendants all the
Yes.
time, with the exception of just a few there.
Mhm.
And this is no knock on the attorney, because he actually gets assigned cases by folks who don't have an attorney. So it just happens to work out, because he says, Joe knows he's the only attorney in court. So he's the only person to turn to. They could turn to me, but it would actually be a conflict. So otherwise, it's a matter of just moving the case along and getting to a point where we are tightening up our writing of appearance tickets, our writing of orders to remedy, so that we're in a position to be able to try the cases and get them done. Some of our appearance tickets and orders to remedy had to be redone, not because of errors, but because staff leaves. When staff leaves, that's the person who wrote the ticket and observed the violation. Unless they're willing to take a day off from their current job, we can't bring them in. So we got to start the process again. So those are the things, as I said, I hope in July. In terms of the cases to go to court, there's one, as we'll talk about a little later. There are a few others that Joe and I have talked about that we can certainly proceed in getting that done. With regard to the idea of the village taking ownership, be it of commercial or residential property, which would be abandoned commercial or residential property, that can also be undertaken as well. And that's just a matter of, knowing which those properties are and the board proceeding accordingly. So those are things that can be done. We are not by far the only community with these issues.
No, I would say that
huge.
everybody has these issues at some point or another. Cities, urban towns and villages, more than the small hamlets and villages and more affluent communities where there are larger properties and single-family homes, but they have their own issues too.
Right.
Is it make any, and I'm looking at the word recommendations, two things. One of the things people don't like isn't this legal stuff that some people probably don't know about, but how ugly it looks. And ugly is in, the eyes of the beholder. But in the space making, there was somebody that contacted me, and I don't know if it was in our interview or just me, but they'd like to do like something in the windows if permitted, with some pictures, with whatever. It's not a legal issue. I don't know what I'm looking at. I should talk to the village manager just to beautify the places a little bit. Because not all landlords are bad players, some of them, Bob's, it's for rent. It's just an empty storefront. Somebody suggested that they like to do a clean mural, an artistic thing, and I think that should go to the placemaking, because part of this is how ugly it makes communities look as well. No good, not allowed to do that?
Well, you're dealing with private property, so
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
really
no,
up
you'd
to the,
have to, you'd have
you know,
to,
you could certainly approach the building owners,
yeah.
at Bob's and stuff, and I don't, if they don't have an issue, and then again, you'd have to, or are there any other issues, then if you're
There's
talking about
probably a
window
few of them.
painting or
Well,
things like that.
I'm looking at the word recommendations. I'm not
Yeah,
just
no,
looking
I-
at legal recommendations.
those are-
or Municipal, but just a general conversation of how something.
Yeah, as long as
can
you
be
have the
enhanced that are
cooperation
upsetting.
of the property
Yeah.
owner, I don't think that's an issue. Yeah.
Nope, not yet.
Microphone?
Not really. Let's find him another microphone. Maybe the other one over there. Nope, not working.
Captain broke the mic.
You gotta lift. There we go.
Okay. In some of the situations of some of the abandoned buildings, if I know like a new owner has purchased some of them, like there is one of the buildings that we have an issue on Croton Avenue, the one close to the library, has been purchased by someone with the intent of bringing forward to us a new development of a new building. So I try to talk to them, encourage and say, well, it would be easier for you not to have to deal with the property maintenance issues, because they do bring up to me and say, oh, we have a abandoned building here, and obviously people use it as a dumping ground, which means we're writing a violation to you as the current owner. You're constantly having to clean it up. If your intent is to build a new building, that encourage you to take your demolition permit now, and allow us to have the building removed. This way you have, it doesn't show as a building where people either, you're not gonna have squatters, you're not gonna have people dumping on it. If you put up a fence, we can have you work with you, just get a fence up to secure the property. But it's more of like the manager said, it depends on the owner, but there's a way maybe to encourage them for a reason why they would incur less issues by doing something like removing the building. And it would take, we'd rather at this point just see the lot empty than
Yep.
and the building falling down.
Always. Not everybody does it though. Okay,
So,
move on.
no, I just had some, I guess, questions for Stuart, and thank you, Stuart, for bringing that up
Yeah.
in regards to the issue of going to White Plains, I guess, instead of going to the local court, because they do have more enforcement in there that be able for them to comply with what we're requesting. So you had mentioned that in the past, and you just mentioned that is, I want to say, a handful of properties. When are we expecting to see those properties, you taking action and taking them actually to White Plains Court?
I want to talk with Maddie and Joe as to, what we think are really the big ones to do. I can think of one off the top of my head right now. And then I basically have the papers, so it's not difficult to do that. It's a matter of just getting the papers filed
Do you think in a couple weeks?
at the most.
Okay,
At the most, yeah. It'll take me that long to just remember how to do the e-filing system with the courts, but I do have my ID, so I can do that.
okay.
So
that'll be-
that's the answer. It would go there. And basically it goes to the judge, and the judge in Supreme Court is in a position to basically say to the owner, and it's something that the judges here can't do because it's not within their
Oh, no,
authority,
we-
but they can
you know,
basically,
we have
he
talked
can
about
basically
that, yeah.
say, you got to make this repair now.
Right. Yeah, and we have discussions about this in the past,
Right.
so I'm eager for that, at least this property or how many properties are got that you have on your desk, that we can move forward with that. And I'm eager to learn more about taking properties on the commercial base, so I will
Yeah.
call you tomorrow about that. So, but thank you.
Anybody? else?
Hi, all. So I want to build on what the mayor and trustee Casada have said. So two comments. The first one being on a topic from maybe an hour ago of the traffic on Yale and some of these other things. know how difficult it is to make any kind of changes in these kind of neighborhoods. They're tight. There's a lot going on. And it cannot be that this is the best way of doing it, but I recognize that any kind of changes that we make will have downstream effects. So one of the things that they pointed out was, let's make sure that we're canvassing the neighborhood that we're doing. And I know that some of this is part of the process, but I just want to reinforce how important it is to understand as much as we can before we say, and now this is what we're going to do, how it impacts all the people, particularly in the particular communities that we're talking about. So important. And number two, when it comes to these particular issues, I am heartened by what you're saying, Corporation Counsel, of some of the changes here. I think what is missing for me is the vision. What will this challenge look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What is the vision? Because part of it is there's a reason why we took a bus tour. A lot of this is you can drive around, walk around and see what's going on. And so it should be that with these changes, with these recommendations, that things will be materially different. And I think what I'm not quite hearing is, and that may not be your job, it'd be our job to come up with, here's the vision, and now help us to make that vision a reality. But that's what I'm looking for, because certainly the way things are now can't be the best way that they can be. There are things that we can do to make our community reflect the best that it can be. And so hearing all of these things, I just want to make sure that all these threads we're talking about are coming together to a place that we're all agreeing, yes, this is definitely where we want to go, whether it's with the abandoned properties, whether it's with the unsafe housing. I would just love a vision that is clear that I can communicate to someone about where it is that we're going.
Deputy Mayor, let me start and just say this. As it relates to vacant buildings, you're always going to have vacant buildings. And one of the issues that we have is that many of these vacant buildings are current in their property taxes. Since they're current in their property taxes, we have no ability to essentially just do a tax foreclosure. And in fact, New York's whole procedure has to get changed, unfortunately, because the Supreme Court of the United States said that basically what we do here is illegal, but we'll put that aside for a second. So you're going to have, now, the other issue, though, is how do you, if you want to call it, beautify a vacant property? What can you do? We do have certain things in our vacant property code as to what the outside is supposed to look like of a vacant property. I will be the first to admit that our vacant property code is probably far too complex. It was based in large part upon Yonkers vacant property code, and probably does not need as much as is in there. That said, there are things that, you know, for example, you don't basically put black in the windows. You put something there that it looks like it's something there, or you have certain fencing, or perhaps you have certain whatever. You do something that makes it look better. That there will be vacant, it's just going to happen. And that's one thing that I think we try to deal with. On the issue of the, you know, basically the substandard housing in terms of what that, the idea is to, as best as possible, stamp it out. I mean, that's the idea, is to have, is that we don't have to write those kind of OTO. I would love that if the only appearance tickets we write is that someone's siding is coming down, or that their deck is too close to the side yard. If we can get the cases out where you have too many units, or you have, though, that would be the ideal, because and to get to that, it requires you know, basically more enforcement from my end to do what the building department folks are doing, so that, because to be honest, the one particular landlord, the folks that I've talked about, they know now, right now, their mindset, and there's no reason for them to think otherwise, is I know that every 3 weeks I can come to court, I can get it kicked another 3 weeks, and I can get another kick to 3 weeks. And I'll say, you know what, I'm going before the planning board, and I have to get an architect. And so the next thing you know, it's 6 months later, it's 9 months later. And you know, that's a problem. And one of the things we are doing now more than we've done before is to placard these places and to make sure those people are out. Because if they can't get the rent, then it stops it. But what we have to do is be, in a sense, from my office particularly, more proactive in that regard. Because it's really easy, having been in court for 40 years, it's really easy to kick it down to the next adjournment. It's very, very easy. But it's not just the mindset in my office. It has to be also, in a sense, the mindset in the court, that we don't want to keep kicking it down. We want to basically get it done. We're ready for trial today, Judge. We'll try it today. Give us a day, we'll get it done. But more important than that is that, and this is where it comes up, a trial in the justice court, as important as it is, will ultimately just result in a finding of guilty and a fine. If you want to change it, that's when you have to go to Supreme Court, or that's where you have to look at other means of getting the property away from that particular landlord. Because otherwise, they'll just keep building it. But the more that if we can stop them from renting, or if we can basically get the tenants out so that the tenants don't rent, and then you can do that. I mean, we do not, as a village, have the ability to basically tell the tenants where you can withhold your rent. But there are proceedings where tenants can withhold their rent if landlords are not doing what they're supposed to do. And all of these things, that's where you cut it off. And then you can at least have the circumstance where people can, live in units that are safe. I mean, Joe and I know we've had people who've been sleeping next to boilers, and we've had, units we've had rooms that are divided by cement blocks. I mean, it's just, and at this point right today, June 14th, 2023, most landlords realize in Ossining, I can keep doing it, because you know what? They'll give me an appearance ticket. And even if I get fined, you know what I'll do? I'll plead guilty. I'll get fined $500, and tomorrow I'll do the exact same thing. And then we have to start the process all over again. That's, what is it? They say, if you keep doing the same thing, you basically, it's a sign of insanity. I guess, it sort of is, at least, but not from their perspective, but from ours. So the only way to do it is to just enforce. And that means police working with the building department, working with the fire department. If we see something's wrong, we get them out, and we don't let the folks back in. I mean, we have to work also with the county, which, to be honest, has not been the most responsive at all, because we're not a social service agency. But if we got to get people out, we want to have a place that they can go, because in most cases, it's not the tenant's fault, but they're in a position where they have no one else to rent to, or to rent from. So that also requires assistance from the county. And as Joe knows, and he can help me out with this, we've called and they've basically said, not much we can do. So that's what it really comes down to from my perspective.
In a lot of cases where we've had some substandard housing that are health issues, we'd call the health department, and it seems that maybe it's a lack of amount of staffing or so forth. They always push it back onto the municipality to handle. Sometimes there's back and forth over, the uniform building code does not address specifically an issue, a person living in an apartment full of mold. We're not certified for mold. So we can't actually put a case up saying, yeah, there's mold in the apartment, because now we have to prove the fact that there is mold there. Are you a certified mold examiner? No, we're not. Who's going to pay to get one? Is it the owner? Well, the owner is the one who's committing the violation. They're not going to pay to get that done. So if we reach out to the health department and say, well, there's a potential health issue, they don't really want to respond to it.
Yeah, with the mold, we have a building now where the tenant has said there is black all over my ceiling. So what did we do? We go to the county. The county says, call the state. What does the state do? Call the county. And we can't write the violation. So it's like, and we have someone who, and basically we would have to close the unit because the person is, but can I prove that it's mold? I can't, but we sure as heck know that's what it is. Yet we have the two higher governmental levels are both going, it's not our job. And so and Joe, as he said, we are not allowed to write that violation.
We can write what the source is if we could see it, like a leaking roof, a pipe that's broken. But the actual thing of mold is something that's not in our code to write. So sometimes we have constraints over certain things that we know are violations, but there's not a method for us to continue, to write up a violation for that.
I'll speak for myself that that's a case where I would love to know about those kinds of cases, because that's where our county and state representatives need to be responsive, right? I have elected these folks to represent us. They're the ones that need to lean on the department heads or whatever, the folks who are the ones who, oh, we don't have enough staffing. We'll get you the money. We'll get you this if that's the deal. And I understand the frustration with the kicking back and forth, but that's where you phone a friend, you let me know. I would love to be Aaron Brockovich my way through this mold situation. I would love to.
Right. I mean,
We can let you know.
we've taught, just not to, I guess, to continue, but like, for example, Stuart had mentioned about changing the, our chapter 162 to include certain things that the state has, asked for us to inspect, like food trucks, right? So most of the food trucks will, the owners will say, we already got certified by the health department. And then and they think that means that we're good to go. And you call up the health department, they say, well, no, we don't check it for the fire safety. We're not the enforcer of the state uniform code. And then I asked them, well, why would you give them a a licensing to go and sell if they don't have a fire inspection to provide to you? A simple procedure is don't give them approval if you haven't gotten a fire inspection. Well, no, that's your problem. So now you got people out there saying, I got a health department approval unless municipalities are enforcing it. Like
Which
we
makes it
are.
hard on the business
Um,
owners too, which
becomes a
also
problem.
causes another
So,
layer of frustration.
Yeah, I want to, so the vision that these are problems and solving problems is actually part of what our job is on the legislative side from staff. There is a point, we're not talking about, as you mentioned, citing, or geez, what are you getting so upset about? So there's an extra person in the apartment, an extra adult. We're talking about really safety issues for both first responders who enter this and can get hurt. It isn't just that too many people live in a unit, it's that it is the accumulation of garbage. It's not enough, the wiring is off. It's boilers and children sleeping next to boilers. It's people sharing kitchens. You have children next to adults that are not part of their family because they're sharing kitchens. I do not want to make this sound like it's an Ossining problem. This is not an Ossining. This is up and down everywhere. If you take a ruler and stick it on Grand Central and draw a line, 1 hour drive from middle of Manhattan, every community, almost every, except for the most affluent. And there are plenty of them in Westchester and Nassau County, but except for some of those, and in New Jersey, I guess, most are suffering from these issues, some more than others. And certainly the cities are, the Yonkers, the New Rochelle's, the White Plains, the this and that. It is really a safety and security issue, and where tenants, frankly, are afraid. And what we have to do, it's like fighting a tsunami. You can't really fight a tsunami. You can't ride a tsunami wave. This isn't like something you do. All you can do is chunk some of this stuff out and try to take piecemeal pieces at a time and get the word out there that people cannot, we cannot pass laws and continue to support events that actually help slumlords make more money. At the very least, my vision is these abusers need to be stopped. And we're never going to stop the whole thing, because it's a supply and demand issue in the New York area, and it has been for decades. And it's not an Ossining thing, but we might be able to push back in some cases because we so well know the bad characters here. We know them by name. We know them because they show up. We know what they're doing. I do want to make more public, though, some of the abusers, especially the banks. I think banks who basically ignore us, who hire attorneys and whose job apparently it is to ignore us, should be in the local paper on a weekly basis. I would imagine that their PR company is not going to be happy, but we got to show our own residents who have bought houses, invested their life savings, and have to live across the street or 2 blocks over from people who are abusing this community, because they too have a right to feel safe. And not to mention, again, first responders who have to go into these buildings and jeopardize their own lives because they didn't know a wall was standing somewhere, or there's a door locked where there's not supposed to be a door, and all of those kind of things. So that's the vision, is one word: safety.
I agree with you, Mayor. I think that the fact that any information that we have is, you can, freedom of information, you can ask for a list of how many violations on a certain property. So unless there's something that I'm missing, I would think that we'd be allowed to advertise or
leave that
register
with
people
Stuart.
who have violations.
Yeah.
There are actual violations. They're not complaints. If these are actual violations and they accumulate to a certain amount, it should be a list of landlords that have multiple violations on multiple buildings. And then the public is made aware. And then I say, well, I was gonna rent the apartment in that building, but now I'm not. And the only way to really get to some of these landlords is you have to kind of hurt them in the pocket. It works when we have Section 8. If you do not keep the building maintained, you do not get paid rent. And it's very effective because those are the first ones that want to fix everything that's wrong with the apartment because they need their money.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. And I'm looking at the clock.
Yeah, no, no,
I didn't realize how that it was
Yeah, I
after
think we,
9.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I just want to kind of ask you a question. You don't have to answer me this now. I think I asked Maddie this a while back, but now that you're here, Joe, I'm going to ask you this. So pretty much now you have a full house. When I said full house, you have full code enforcement, I believe,
You mean
maybe
on staff?
one staff. Okay. So, but you do have 2 assistant building inspectors now, and one is in sort
Yeah,
of training.
one currently and one that will be
Okay.
starting.
So, but we do have a code enforcement on Saturdays.
Yes.
Correct. And we had that person for a while now.
Yeah, about a year.
Okay. Doing Saturdays.
Every other, no?
No, it's suppo-
We do have
it's-
them Saturdays, but once she was acclimated to what the job was, it's maybe 9 months or so we had Saturdays.
Okay.
So she's constant Saturdays.
Yes.
Okay. So in this past 9 months, more or less, how many violations has that been issued on a Saturday? You don't have to give me a number. It's just,
Look,
I don't know.
just an,
Stuart is jumping
I
on the
can, I
microphone.
can tell you this, I get probably 3 or 4 emails with orders to remedy from Christina every Saturday.
what kind of violations, more or less?
Generally exterior, but sometimes it's fire code violations, but a lot of exterior violations.
What about garbage?
Yes. Oh, yeah, a lot of
But
too
when you
much-
said only 3 a Saturday, I can tell you by driving just on my block, I can find 3 in less than an hour.
Well, I'm only telling you that I get about,
No, no, I understand. I
So
understand.
it-
So
It's
I,
really important. I just want to say this. Make sure that you can call me, you can, call, because if there's stuff out there, Christina's all over the place and she works hard on a
I
Saturday,
understand that.
but call, and if that's an issue on, in that
It's not just in
area.
Spring Street. It's not, I can tell you,
If-
in my,
if you- if
in my,
you-
everywhere,
Okay, so
including Highland Avenue.
make sure that we know about that, and we'll make sure that she's
So,
focusing on those areas.
So more or less, you get 3 violations, let's say 5 violations on Saturdays. Is that the average, more or less, Joe or Stuart?
Sometimes more. I mean, I ask her also to go out, clean up like things. People on the weekends post up a lot of stuff all over the village, posting of tag sales of things that they're not supposed to have there. So this is an opportunity to take those down, clean them up. See if you see any people, parking commercial vehicles on properties on Saturday that we don't see on Monday to Friday because, they're out working. So maybe Saturday, assume that there's nobody in the building department, so I'll take liberties with that. I think I've noticed more recently that there's been less where we found people actually, what we could see from the street, doing work without permits as much, because I believe they're starting to get the understanding that we're here now 6 days. So I haven't had as many. We did have a lot of that in the beginning, but that's recently slowed down. And actually, it's probably a good thing that they know that we're there on Saturday as well, so they can't take liberties.
And just to be clear, we have a police department that works 24/7, and they also have eyes on it. So this is
But they
They're,
cannot
they're well
enforce-
aware
yeah,
that they can call in things on
Yeah, but they
Sundays.
cannot enforce property maintenance.
They
though.
can call things in. So, and they do. I just don't want to give anybody the impression that we're only paying attention 6 days a week.
No, but I'm talking about the building department right now.
I
That's-
know, but
okay.
I'm saying this for the public's understanding.
And we're actually going to add to that because now that we're going to have another assistant building inspector, we're going to have one of them's going to be starting shortly also on Saturdays. So that we'll have a code enforcement officer and an assistant building inspector here on Saturdays too. So we'll have two
But
sets.
that
of
will
eyes.
be an additional to possible inspections as well,
Yes.
not just.
So we're scheduling inspections on
enforcement.
Saturday. Actually, we did a couple today for this first Saturday that he'll be working.
And in fairness, people do move because we have 49% of rentals in Austining, which is a very urban sort of number. New people are moving in. They don't even know the rules. They don't know you can't just throw, whatever is left from the previous owner or because it's when they're not working on the weekends, when they're moving in and out to apartments. And that's sometimes I notice that on South Island more than elsewhere. So that's normal sort of, stuff that goes on. Did we get through the follow?
Yes, we are through. And so are we ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Mhm.
Okay. So our next agenda item is candidate disclosure, and this was brought up at the request of the board for us to consider candidate disclosure to prevent candidates from misrepresenting themselves. So I would like to turn that over to Corporation Counsel.
Thank you, folks. This candidate disclosure proposed local law is modeled on the county's law, which was signed in March, the end of March of 2023. And basically would require within 30 days of an individual being designated and nominated for the elective offices of mayor or trustee, or being appointed to those positions, to file with the clerk a document that we've identified as a candidate disclosure form, which would provide the following information: the full legal name of the candidate, as well as any previously used legal names, names of post-secondary educational institutions, degrees earned, month and year of graduation, all full-time employment held within the past 10 years, indicating the types of employment, any military service, as well as a certification by the candidate or appointee that the information contained in the form is true and complete to the best of the candidate or appointee's knowledge. The form will be provided to the candidates by the village clerk, and the clerk will be the individual who will actually hold on to these. The form, except for the possibility of some redaction, would be subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Law. If a candidate or appointee had a question, they could present an advisory opinion or ask for an advisory opinion from the village's Board of Ethics. The primary difference between the proposed local law and the counties is that the county does have I won't call it an enforcement mechanism, but basically, if someone does not file or does not do what they are supposed to do, a complaint can be made to the county's Board of Ethics. They can conduct an investigation under the county code. I believe they can either make a civil finding that the person is in violation. They can actually refer it to the DA if they thought it was worth a criminal violation. And that's the essence of it. I did check. I have not found any other municipality in Westchester that has this. I did note that Rybrook, in their ethics code, requires candidates for elective office at least 30 days before a village election file a sworn statement with the village clerk that whether or not they've had any interest or done business with the village or have any financial interest in any village business. And that's the only thing that I saw.
Business though, right?
Right, and that's right, that's right. And that's within the Village of Rybrook code. So that's basically what the law is. As I said, the language is virtually identical to what exists under the county's code, with the exception of changing county code to village charter, and the section numbers Otherwise, that's what it is. And I leave it up to the board for its discussion and whatever they would like to do.
I'm just looking at it.
Sure.
Okay. Any comments? I'm sure Deputy Mayor is going to have some comments on it.
Yeah, so this is something that I saw the county doing, and I thought that it would make sense for us to adopt locally as well. It is solving, it is, how do you, kind of prophylactically addressing a problem. It doesn't exist yet, hopefully never will, but is adding a level of, you can think of insurance, given what we now know, folks that are running for public office in this world that we now live in are willing to do. There used to be, in the previous world before, I don't know, 2021, 2020, something like that, where maybe 2016, where if you said who you were and where you went to school and where you worked and all of that, you can say it, and most people would think that you're telling the truth. Why would you lie? After all, you're running for public office. Surely someone will be saying, hey, that's not true. You didn't work there or go here or whatever. And yet we find that honesty is not necessarily the policy when it comes to everyone running for office. And so this is an opportunity to avoid folks at a local level that may have that orientation toward the truth, not necessarily being super aligned to it. Also, it gives an opportunity for the public, aside from solving that problem, to see information about the candidates running for office. Now, we have tools like LinkedIn, and folks often will publish their resume in different ways if they're running for office, but it is helpful to have one place, the village clerk's office, where we can have this kind of information documented. I think it would be helpful for history, for us to know this information, so we have a sense of where folks have worked and all of this. I know that for me, as I've done history work around the village, what were the kind of roles that people had that sat in these seats, knowing that, hey, it used to be a lot of local business owners, that back when it wasn't the village mayor, it was the village president, and there was a lot of business owners that not exclusively, but a lot of the times held these kinds of seats. Now, much less so. None of us here own a business full-time in auctioning as our profession. And so things have changed in that way. And to me, that's interesting. I like to know that kind of thing. And I think folks in the future would as well. And if we had that information available at the clerk's office, I think it would be interesting as well. So not only is it potentially solving a problem that we now have in the world we live in, but also could add some helpful information for people that are doing research about their local government in the future.
Anybody? Okay, so one of the things that I had discussed is none of this is actually enforceable. It's public information. It's probably why no one else followed suit with the county. It was a big bravado, but as oftentimes does happen in politics. But the reality is that when you're elected by the public, the only people that can get rid of you is the public, because even if the Board of Ethics doesn't like what you're doing, it's only an advisory opinion. Which is why we have a president that was impeached twice and has stayed in office, because frankly, only the people that put you in office can get rid of you. For the most part, not all the time. There are a couple of exceptions, I have to say that. So when you can't enforce things, I'm never crazy about them. On one hand. On the other hand, why not? I always say, what's the downside here? People who run for office should know, if they don't know it before they run, they'll certainly know when they fill this out, that it's a little bit of a fishbowl life. And if you're not ready for a little bit of a fishbowl life, you probably can't run for office. It's even, well, not even at the local level, you go to a supermarket, people stop you, they talk to you. It's good and it's bad. So it shouldn't be a surprise to someone, that this exists. We have had scenarios where we have had trustees who say they went here or they went there, some very quite good universities. What they don't say is they never graduated from there. So it's not a lie, they went there. You could say, well, you could have looked on LinkedIn, it didn't say they graduated or not. What does that really matter? If the public voted for that person, they voted for that person. So for me, it's really a bit more of like, hey, you're in the public eye. The public should know your background. And by the way, most of it's public. The one place that I'm not comfortable, so I'm okay with it. Like, I see an upside, I don't see a downside. And we've discussed this. The one thing that I do have to say, makes me a little uncomfortable is I think the issue is that what you say should be the truth. But you may not want to say everything. There may be people who've had jobs or people who were fired or people that may have had jobs that they think might not look so good. I can't name a profession, I don't know, that is legal, that you'd be embarrassed, but you may be. And there may be other issues. People go through divorces, stuff happens that you're not proud of. A DUI conviction, you can run for office and have a DUI conviction. But in the past, people may not have actually talked about that. They're embarrassed by it. Maybe stuff happens. So I think on balance, I'd be more comfortable, not that you have to say every job you've had for the past 10 years, but rather that what you say you did, that you actually did. Now, I don't know if the other trustees have a problem with that. Like if I said I graduated from Brandeis University. If I say that I'm a graduate of Brandeis, I should be a graduate of Brandeis, not visited it, not gotten a certificate for gardening that was a 3-day course given there. What I say should be true. If what I got was a 3-day certificate from Brandeis, it should say that, because that's not a degree. As long as it's truthful, that's what the public should know about you. But I would imagine that it's not designed to embarrass people. It's not a design that if you made a mistake 7 years, it's 10 years, I think, right? And by the way, if people who run against you really want to find things, they don't need this. They'll find it. So, you're not protecting yourself. I'm more comfortable with if I say I did this, that's what I did. If I, like DeSanto said, he did stuff that he didn't do. If I said I worked at IBM for 3 years, or if I say I worked there, then I should have worked there. That would make me a little more comfortable. That's probably a switch of just a word or two, but I don't know. I don't know if that still meets your.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that. I'd be completely fine with that.
I think it's a good thing. I'm actually would like more of the elected officials. I mean, we also do IMAs for the village clerk and the, we have the clerk and we have the tax. Technically, they also were part of our world, but this doesn't affect them. This is just mayor and trustees, correct? And it doesn't affect any of you guys.
No.
So it's just the electeds. Same thing I think happened in the county, right? It's only the legislative body. It is not.
And the county executive.
And the county executive, right? But he's elected. The county executive is an elected official.
Right, but they split it because the
Yes,
Board of
because
Legislators
he's-
of the county, because he doesn't serve in the Board of
Right,
Legislators.
Exactly. Any thoughts?
I did work when I was in high school, I worked at McDonald's. And I also worked at a motel. I was a club. So that's not part of my
That's more
resume.
than 10 years ago.
That is more than 10 years ago. I agree with the mayor. I think
Just
there's,
barely.
yeah, that's
Just barely.
thanks.
Just barely.
Just now got it,
Stuart, you brought something up too. something
No, I
really
mentioned to
different.
Mayor, I had my concern is that there may be someone who does not want to give any prior names.
Yeah.
For there could have been orders of protection, or there could have been some domestic violence issues. I have to put something, be it on the form, that, there may be, if there's certain information they do not want to provide, they may not have to
Right,
provide.
so one of the questions I asked you is, if I run and I'm elected, but I don't want to fill this out, there's nothing that compels me
No, nothing.
to do that.
I think what the deputy mayor said is that the person who might be your opponent would say, well, they didn't fill it out, so, why not? But you're right, there's no
Can't
hammer here.
compel an which is why I see an upside to it. I don't see a downside to it, so I always feel like if that's the case, then it's a good thing to do. And I think it is a little bit of a bump, like for people who are running to sit there and go, okay, this is real. Like, I think some of us.
Is there an
ran-
example of this form somewhere? What it might look
Well,
like?
the county should have something, except they have legislation about.
It's hard for
don't
me to
think so.
know without seeing what it might.
Oh, the
what-
actual
what-
form?
Yeah, well, kind of what you're asking for. I mean, I have nothing to hide, by the way, but I'm just,
Well, you're already
asking.
elected, so you don't have to worry. so
oh, okay, then I do have stuff to hide.
much.
but I would just be interested in seeing an
Trustee White,
example.
I will check if they've actually come out with the form yet. I have their
because-
legislation, but I don't know if they've
The
actually.
county thought, they said we encourage municipalities to do it, and I mean, like, nobody jumped on that one.
I mean, when I
So
was born, I had a different name. Would I have to supply that?
It's 10 years, I think. Most
Oh,
of the
okay,
stuff is
all
10
right.
years. I think most of it is 10 years out for.
I will
employment.
change that because it does say any previously used legal names. But again, there's going to be an exception because there could be certain, and we don't have to go that far back. And again, there could
Good,
be
it's really
people who,
far.
for legal reasons, you know,
We could also have this, that be permanent. We could say, let's do a pilot for 5 years and then the board can choose to continue it if it feels like, hey, it's been of value, it's been good, it's been interesting,
Okay.
what's caused problems.
you
And
could sunset
so
it
we
if you
can, we
wish.
can sunset it and
I think
then,
It's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I think most of us think it's fine. And again, I think that if you don't want to fill out a line, you sort of have to decide, do I want to fill it in or not, to the point Dana just made. And then we know other people who have been adopted who don't want the original name, but I'm not sure that when you're a minor, that's actually a legal name going back. But I can imagine people have gone through divorces, must have some stuff. They're not, I don't know what that would be. I can't imagine it. I fortunately have not gone through a divorce, but certainly I've been around enough people where there may be things. Okay, let's leave it a little bit more open as far as the form goes.
We'll do that, but what I'll, I can put this on next week to call for public hearing. In the meantime, I'll work on a form. I'll send it around to all you folks just to. sort
I
of-
don't think people's personal lives deserve to be on this form. Whether how many times they've been married, that kind of stuff. That
No, I
has
don't have
nothing
that
to
on
do.
here.
with- Yeah, okay, all right.
I'm talking about people have different names.
Names.
Yeah, I think
Some
this is,
people go back to their names, some people change their
Yeah,
names
I
altogether.
I think this is just about your background, your work background.
Well, we've certainly seen at the
you know,
federal
college
level
and
what can
stuff.
happen.
And that's what started this.
Yeah, I think this
I
is
mean, my
just.
God.
Yeah.
We'll call this the DeSantis, no, it's Santos, excuse me, the Santos bill. Oh, Jesse's laughing. I don't get him to laugh that much. I like that. So we'll name it the Santos bill. It'll be wonderful. Look, the idea is that what you say is the truth and accurate. That's why I'm leaning towards that. If you had a previous name or you've been married 3 or 4 times, it's not that unusual. And you don't want to mention one of those names, then,
In fact,
it's what you say has to be
right,
truthful.
because the last thing will be, and it says here, a certification by the candidate or appointee that the information contained in the form is true. And now it says true and complete. I'm just going to say true.
Yeah.
To the best of
That's
the
what I would go
candidate's
with.
appointee's knowledge. That's all. So in other words, if I put it down there, it's true. That's all. Okay. Thank you.
It's not going to weed anybody out, believe me.
it's a low bar.
It's a very low bar. Like, we just had people who use words in an interesting way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, on March 23rd, a notice of repair and a notice to vacate the premises was served to South Island Avenue LLC, the owner of 43 South Island Avenue. Joe is requesting that the village has an engineering survey made for that property since the condition of the building is continuing to deteriorate and no actions have been taken by the owner to this point.
I just spoke about it. Just remind me how many units are in that building?
Exactly, I'm not sure, but I would say maybe 40. And I believe there's also some office space on the first floor.
Okay, any questions? Go get them. Next.
Very good. We'll have that ready for you.
Are you looking it up?
I can do
Those are the
it. I think it's, I'm next.
You're next. Okay, George, don't keep going.
every Saturday.
Okay, folks, next is proposed local law. We talked about it briefly last week relating to video conferencing. This would basically allow for a disabled board member who is coming to the meeting remotely to count towards the quorum requirement, which is consistent with the recently enacted change to the public officers law. And this, the change that we made and the change that we made last year, all will sunset on July 1 of 2024. because we'll see if by that time the legislature comes back and
Continues,
changes
yeah.
it again. But basically, everything would remain the same, except that if we have a member who is disabled, they can be remote and they can count towards the quorum. Currently, if they're remote, they cannot count towards a quorum.
Right. What qualifies as disabled?
Disabled,
Even if it's a temporary thing?
no,
Yeah.
it's basically, it's based upon the
You
state's
said.
definition, which is a physical, mental, or medical impairment resulting from anatomical, genetic, or neurological conditions which prevents the exercise of a normal bodily function or is demonstrable by medically accepted clinical or laboratory diagnostic techniques, or a record of such an impairment or a condition regarded by others as such an impairment. So yes, it can be temporary,
That we would all qualify for it.
but it's the state, it's the state's definition.
It's like when you're very ill, and you cannot make it, but so it does, it's the issue of counting for quorum. It's not just the voting, it's, you can participate, but it doesn't count for the quorum.
And so in addition to changing the local law, we would also change the procedure for video conferencing, which was adopted at the same time and which is needed to allow for the video
And
conferencing.
this will go for all the boards, like the land use. board.
Yes, it would go for
Just the land. use
all the
board.
boards that require quorums to conduct as public bodies, correct?
All right, we're moving forward on that. Am I getting them seeing heads?
Oh, why not?
Yeah, because when Karen starts a topic,
a
we
roll.
talk about it for an hour.
Okay. Next is revision to local law regarding chapter 250. This deals with parking at the municipal building, something we discussed last week, if you'll remember. Maddie was kind enough to bring up sort of one or two slight glitches, which we will
Maddie.
fix. Well, one is that we didn't provide that for the 6 spaces over there, Monday to Friday, 8 to 8P, they're going to be employee only. So it's not just the 30. The other point that Maddie made is the board wanted those 6 and these 5 on Saturdays to be between 8 and 8, 8A and 8P to be metered or timed. But that the remaining 30 would be free on Saturdays. As the assistant manager has appropriately pointed out, what that basically means is someone, instead of parking here, they'll park one spot over and they won't have to pay. So Maddie, your suggestion was, and go ahead.
I was telling Stuart, he did it so elegantly, and I had to make myself a little table here so that I understood exactly what all of the rules were. So yes, thank you, Stuart. Basically, my suggestion was either for Saturday day, either all the spaces in this parking lot should be free, or the metered ones should be hourly, and then the remainder should require a municipal day parking pass. But either one of those scenarios would be ideal, as opposed to
How
what
do you
now
get a
is.
municipal day parking lot on a Saturday?
I'm sorry, what? What's the question?
How do you get a municipal day parking lot for Saturdays?
It wouldn't just be for Saturdays. It would be for anyone who has a day muni parking pass. Yeah.
I thought you meant just for those. Okay.
So hold on a second. So, but now if I have that tag
Mhm.
on the 30 spaces that are for employees only during Monday through Friday, that means that if I see an empty spot, I can park there.
If you have a tag.
If I have a tag.
If you have a tag. So basically what I'm suggesting is either one of two things. One is on a Saturday between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. You can park anywhere you want in the lot. It's free. You don't have to pay. You don't have to permit. It's all bets are off between those 12 hours. That's one option. The other option is either the 5 spaces and the 6 spaces you pay by the hour, and all the remaining spaces you have to have a permit to be there. So nobody is for free. You're either permit or paid.
Your point is only on Saturdays, so during. the
Right.
week,
correct.
So, okay, so that has to be a sign, a very clear sign that
wanna-
it says only on Saturdays you're allowed to park here if you have a
Do you wanna
day
see my
park.
chart?
No, because that's the kind of show you're gonna have to put on the sign. that We will then end up on some late night show.
That's how my brain works. I'm sorry.
All
I mean,
right.
I understand that, and I
That's
don't,
anymore.
yeah, no, I'll be okay with that. I just want to make sure that it, with the meter pay portion of it and having, day parking on a Saturday that they have to pay.
Alternatively, and this is something that I hadn't thought of and really don't want to do, but if the board really would like for all of the spots in the parking lot to be paid during that 12-hour gap only on Saturdays, we could actually set up another zone in the parking lot through the paid payment app. I really would not prefer to do that.
Then why are you
yeah.
doing up as an option. No more options.
My-
hand
yeah.
is-
Yeah, let's not bring up options
no
we don't
more
want to do.
options.
Like,
My-
let's-
Position is I'm on team free on Saturdays. That's my position.
The whole 30 free.
30,
No, the whole 41.
41, 30
The whole
plus 11.
41 free.
Every space in lot is free.
Yeah, but so part of the discussion that I think you were not here part of it last week or last time that we talked about this is because we are trying to make it equal to the downtown itself.
Right.
So if we're saying we have it free, then why can I be free downtown?
Because-
We're trying to be.
I mean, it's just different. Why?
Why is the difference? It's still a commercial. Why
So
am I still going
there
to the
is an
deli
issue
or
of
to the
turnover
corner?
spaces here for most of the spaces. For some are being parked by residents who live in buildings. Some of it is for local shops and restaurants that are nearby where parking's limited. So you could argue either way.
Because the turnover is lower here. It's higher downtown.
Well,
Is it-
the turnover's highest when we have paid parking by the hour. The turnover in, that we're looking at, like in the, while there's higher turnover, we still have the same issue. And while we're going to a different paid format in the muni lots where parking is currently free or permit, depending on different spaces, is because when you don't have enough turnover,
Right.
it's
After
an
8
issue.
PM, it is.
On those 30 spaces, we were talking about the 30 spaces last time that was gonna be
So what,
for
what
residents, correct?
what Stuart had in the law, if I'm looking at my table correctly, is that every evening, the 5 spots are requiring a muni night permit. All of the other employee spots also require a muni night permit. And the 6 spots that are the new ones over here will be hourly between 8 PM and 8 AM the next
I
morning.
believe that's what we talked about with Sue, correct? Yes, yes.
I am not in the school of free on Saturday. Contrary to free. I could discuss the whole thing all over again, but I feel we spent an hour and a half last time, so I don't want to go through that again. So that's one, where you going?
So it'll
with
be
this?
option B. that
So
they have
option
to
B
be-
would be that
that
you
they
can
have to be
only
paid.
park in those remaining spaces if you have a daytime
I
municipal
would
pass.
part B, I guess, of all
So
this.
you
so.
will be with pay, Dana? Bob actually went with that as well, I think, but I can't speak for him because it's a new day. And you are? Where are we going?
Does this make this the single most complicated parking lot in the village?
So far,
So far,
That's because we have employees here, because it's the only lot with municipal in the village is because of the employees. That's why it's complicated, because they need to be able to park.
Keep in mind that there was one point, and people who've been here longer can correct me if I'm wrong. We used to not allow parking at all here because it was a village parking lot and but it seemed sort of like
Silly.
not good to not allow people to park here when we're not here. So this is now why we're evolving, because we are trying to be more considerate of our neighbors who have very limited parking.
look in the commercial trucks. No,
No commercial trucks.
Anyways, where are we?
Dana,
The question was,
A or
is
B?
you
Oh,
want free or you want them to pay, pretty much? That's what it comes down to.
during the day Saturday.
During the day
During
Saturday.
Sunday, it's all free.
I think it should be what happens in the rest of the village.
and
So that's
fair.
sort of B in a way,
Yeah.
that kind of more.
This is close to be. That's what
Yeah.
Bob was saying last time in Manning. One of the things we want to try to do is equalize the pricing across the downtown. That's where there's commercial area. So people don't think, oh, well, but on Quimbley, it's this way. Okay, that's a commuter lot, maybe a little bit, but we're trying to like equalize so, and not to, and not to have something sit empty like this lot, which is really in the middle of town. I mean, people can come from the community center and park here if there's some event, like, but you don't want people just parking here when they have other spots, because it's just where they've discovered they don't have to pay.
I think the huge bonus about doing this digitally, and I think we're, going to be doing it down at the train station also, is that if, for example, we go with B, which it sounds like we're doing, and folks in the neighborhood are just not using it at night, we find that it's not valuable to have it as a municipal lot at night, then we can for free, completely change it. All it requires is another local law change, which of course is sort of an
So
administrative
the
task, but
technology is just a click, but the legislation.
Mhm. yeah, but we're going to be exploring this throughout all of the municipal lots because our parking enforcement officers and rightfully so have sort of, flagged multiple things in the local laws that they say, okay, well, you've covered A, B, C, D, E, and F, but what about G? I have this guy who's here and he has a question and it's not
Never-ending.
answered by the code. So that's why, Stuart's been so invaluable in sort of helping me poke holes in this over the last
It's
year.
never ending. I parked in Mamaroneck that day and I walked into the store and said, like, I don't understand exactly. She goes, I've only worked here 10 years. I have no idea. I park all the way down there. I could tell you where to park. I mean, it's a parking, like, we're trying to do the best we can. It will be iterative and we'll get complaints or we'll see something we missed.
Now, if you
I
want
was
to,
No
yeah.
longer allowed to give recommendations.
So, now, if you want to park for free, you just find a spot that the state owns and you just park there.
There we go. There we go.
Otherwise,
All right.
we're fine. We are going to make, Maddie and I, if you want to call it a cosmetic change. So it's instead of looking in paragraph form, it's actually going to be in chart form. So you'll have
That'll be
parking lot,
fantastic.
location, what you can do, and it'll be boom, boom, boom. So everybody will know.
That in a blow up. That little sticky, you're just gonna blow it
Yes,
up.
exactly. This is
Yeah.
gonna be the poster.
So we'll have the resolution for next week, folks. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd
Last,
like to ask a question.
go ahead, I'm
about
sorry.
Parking, the way I use the Sustainable Westchester app for the garbage, which by the way, I love. I know some people say it could be better. I don't know. I find it very helpful.
It has some glitches.
Yeah, not for me. It seems
that's
to
your
be good
fault,
enough
man.
for me, man. I'm perfectly
Tuesdays
fine
are
with it.
missing. By the way, the Tuesdays, the lift pickup, they're missing. It used to be there. Just saying.
Well, I must not need a lot. Anyway, I go, I look at it. Do we have, maybe we already have, and I'm not using it, something for parking that gives you the different things about the parking?
So I know trustee Casada's been asking for this for as long as I've worked for the
Really?
village,
This
which
one
is,
I haven't
yeah.
heard. Oh, no
I actually
kidding. That one I
met with
missed.
probably about 2 months ago, a software developer who said that they could do it for us, but then they also wanted to upsell us on a lot of other very
Yes.
fancy
Yes, yes.
elements of that, which I don't think we're prepared to do. So we can certainly go back to them and see, do they want to develop, an app, but that's probably going to be more expensive than I think this board is going to be willing to stomach at this time. So, I think Valerie and her team may be able to come up with something that at least we can put on the website that's searchable or
Well,
something like
some of
that.
those
similar to
apps actually tell you availability of spots, the
That-
way
that they
some,
do.
I'm actually going simpler than that. I'm
Yes.
going like, here's lot
No, but actually,
XYZ.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
38 spots and here are the rules.
so actually, Mary, that's probably something that Maddie and I talked about. I don't know when you started, 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
in the village,
I think it's
37, actually.
so. I started looking into, actually Google has an option to do a lot of that stuff. And yeah, so and that's something that Maddie and I talked about many years ago. So it was something that we can create a map and put exactly how many spots, what kind of spots there are, so pretty much map out the whole. And I think that's one
That
of the
would
things
be, I
that we
think,
started.
helpful to some people.
So-
And certainly like for stores with their new employees and say, look, they're.
And
fun-
that was the concept. That
Yeah,
was
no,
exactly
no,
was the
I know.
concept. So yeah.
I was at the fair and somebody said how they parked a mile away and somebody else said there's a parking lot right behind here. And I know there are 2 empty
Yep.
spots. And they're like, what? There are parking lots behind here? Like, people just don't know.
Yeah, no, it's eminently doable. I think just, in reference to the company that I met with, the development company was talking about, Mayor, to your point, about being able to tell you where vacant spots are, except here's the problem. They can't really tell you where a vacant spot is unless you put a sensor in the ground. They can tell you based on traffic patterns where
Anything
there's
sensors
likely
and
to be an empty spot. Even some of the paid parking apps can do that. I don't really know that I want to tell people there's a vacant spot if there's not. So,
By the time they get there.
exactly right.
They have them in garages in other parts of the world. They're highly efficient, but the whole money making is in the sensors and the chips and the maintenance of those, not in the apps that they'll basically give you for nothing. We're not in that league of being able to support something like that. It's sort of cool. I'm not looking for cool. I'm looking for just practical. So, but anyway,
Okay.
good. Next.
Last on tonight's agenda,
Please.
and it's really, it'll take 3 seconds.
Mhm.
Next week, we will have the public, actually, we'll have the adoption of the local law with regard to stop, stand, and park. That will include fees, which are at the end of that code.
Well,
The thing that Maddie Dennis Farrell from FBS and I had discussed, and Dennis pointed it out, is that our fees were actually quite low. So this actually brings them up, not to the highest within the county, but within the area, but basically, fees anywhere from ranging from, looks like $35 up to about $250, which is for an abandoned vehicle. But again, all these will be, since we're all putting it within the village code, it's all obviously village money, which is helpful in that regard. So this is just basically what the fees are. The fees are now a little bit lower. This will go higher. The advantage of having it this way is that this is a fee schedule that the court will then use and will then adopt, they'll basically, they will take this, they will post it outside of the window at the courthouse with what the fees are, rather than basically going by the state set fees. So, this is, and what it is it's the statute, I didn't go into it last week. The board will be adopting a schedule, which is Schedule 28, which is going to be the fines and penalties. And that's basically where we are. And it's just part of next week's public hearing on the local law.
You, sir?
So the only thing like strategically that I would just like to know, and I know I don't know if I'm asking for a lot. I think that a village of our size and demographic stuff needs to be pricing wise in the middle. We should not be the lowest and we should not be the highest. So as long as I'm told this is on the low side, I'm okay with that. I don't want to be on the high side.
We are not.
I just want to make sure as we go through this, that we are in the middle, which for the number of thousands of people live here and what we need to accomplish, middle is probably fair space. Yeah, I mean, fair. And that we should be able to say to people, "It's 35, I mean, I had somebody yelling at me, I think you were there, $35, not affordable.
So
We're like, "Yeah, it's a little on the low
just
side."
yeah, just as a quick clarification,
Mhm.
also just a reminder that when we were talking about this, some of the stuff we were talking about is like you have to be, don't call me on this, our engineer is here. So it's 20 feet from the curve, more or less. So again, so if we do pass this law, we have to make sure that we mark 20 feet from the curve throughout the village. So we'll be able to
Why
enforce
are you
this.
looking at Paul?
Because Paul is the one who's gonna have to do this.
Most of the places actually mark signage.
Some of them.
It's also in B and T, so it's enforceable.
No, what I'm saying is, that oh, Mike.
Paul, you don't have a
You know,
mic.
Mike. So I just want to, there are some neighborhoods, obviously, where are not signs or clearly signs, or stop signs, or just lines where it says this is 20 feet, even like for a fire hydrant, this is usually very light. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to go through.
You mean
My
the yellow
suggestion,
on
the yellow on the
sidewalk
sidewalk curve, designating exactly what that is. And part of that problem becomes the overcrowding, and that part becomes the too many cars and not enough space to park. So all this, so I just want to make sure that we're trying to fix something, but we're not giving the solution to where all these other vehicles have to go. So we have to be mindful of this as well. So implementation is great, enforcement is great, but if we're saying we're going to put this, we're going to tell our police department that they have to enforce this, and we are not fixing the problem, then we are just creating the problem more for the people that are parking on the streets. So we have to just, again, I don't want to pass a law that is not going to fix the problem. It seems like half of this stuff sometimes is that.
For the next year's budget, you probably want to have somebody look at the signage. I've been sitting here for a while. I don't recall like the stuff that's on the poles and
A lot of that,
they're worn out, they're bent. Like, I just think we need to put some, like we do for sidewalks, the yellow paint by the fire hydrants. They're just worn out. They're there, they're just worn down, that's all. I don't know if it's a people power issue or if it's a money issue, but it's something you guys might want to think about, to have somebody with just a little video going street to street and saying, like, Get them a GoPro and put them on an electric bike and just see where we got and then say we need, 48 linear miles of yellow paint or whatever the heck it is. And it'll take X number. I just haven't, I don't recall the last time we did this in a budget, and I've been here now for a few years, so it must be a while.
Yeah, we've been doing pretty comprehensive sign replacement in the last year,
Okay.
particularly. I will tell you that I do like installing signage. It's very enforceable. Not a big fan of painting the curbs. I think aesthetically it's not appropriate, but it's also something that without a sign is not enforceable. And the sign is really all you need. Parking in an intersection is reinforced with the sign, but I don't want to speak on behalf of the police department, but it's in V&T already, and necessarily you don't need a signage to enforce it. But we do like to enforce it. We do like to supplement a lot with signage to make it clear. And I understand what you said about a
The
lot
fire
of,
hydrants is a little bit of an issue, actually.
yeah, I
From
understand.
a person like me who actually couldn't tell you what 20 feet looks like, I have to say that when you're in cities and they actually do the curb
Yeah,
painting, it's just helpful because you see exactly where your tires are. But the point is, if we need to pay for stuff, that should not be holding us up, because I think this board would say, yeah, let's get it done. If you feel, it's not a criticism of the signs, it's just like, let's put it into a bundle and put it into the next budget.
I will certainly,
know.
so the sign budget, actually, you did increase it a couple of years ago, and we've been working off of that
Good.
pretty well.
Great, no problem then, that's good. I wanted to ask you, littering, do we have laws about what it costs if people are caught littering, like throwing crap on our beautiful sidewalks? To put it politely.
We do. It's
Yeah, it is
under-
a technical term.
It's a general violation. I think it's max of 250 per violation if the person is observed
Do we
doing.
have any signs that say littering? is
That I
250?
don't know.
Paul, do we have any
I've
signs about
seen it.
littering? I
I've seen
haven't.
those.
Do we
Maybe
have
not in
any?
local streets, but maybe in the major.
Yeah,
Highland
I don't
Avenue,
know.
I have seen.
Okay, that may be something I would like that looked at, because I think there's a lot of littering. I don't think people.
There
are
might be
bad.
informal ones. I don't believe there's ones that actually reference the code and the fine associated with it, because I
Yeah,
don't believe
I'd
we
like
have.
that. I think 10, 15, 20% people see a sign go, it's like an actual thing. I mean, the other 80% will keep throwing their cigarette butts on the ground, but stopping 20% is already a win for me as far as I'm concerned. So if I can just, again, for
I'll
the
let you
next
know.
budget year, I'm not looking for the next 30 days here, just for 24. Okay, what do we got?
That concludes
Okay.
tonight's
We
agenda.
have exec session. Anybody?
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Anybody?
Second?
Well, there was a motion, so all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the meeting at 9:55. We are adjourning for exec, I think, matter of
Matter of,
personnel.
Legal and matter of personnel.
Yeah. Thank you, folks. Have a good evening.